please introduce yourself?
My name is Federico Morando, and I am a co-founder and CEO of Synapta. I have a really peculiar and multidisciplinary background. Let's say that I can pretend to be a computer engineer for half an hour, a lawyer for a couple of hours, and an economist for a few years, hopefully, since this is my actual field of studies. And I spent 7 years at the beginning of my career at the Polytechnic of Turin in a multidisciplinary research center called the Nexus Center for Internet and Society. And there I studied in particular public sector information. And it is in this domain that I learned a series of interesting insights which later on allowed me to fund Synapta, my startup.
Well, tell us about your company, Synapta.
Yeah, Synapta was founded almost 4 years ago by myself and a very young colleague, still a student at the Polytechnic of Turin. He is a software engineer and the CTO of Synapta, and our main field of work is data integration. So we take data from different sources, frequently open data available online, and we integrate them, we enrich them, we analyze them. In particular, now we are working in the domain of data about public procurement. And most of what I will say later on is about a specific project which is becoming our main product and service, which is called contrattipubblici.org, that is public contracts. And it's a search engine and a series of business intelligence tools in the domain of public contracts.
Okay. What's the need you decide to take into consideration for your project, and what solution did you decide to adopt?
Well, at the very beginning of our idea, the actual need that we wanted to address was our personal need as a citizen and a researcher to make sure that a lot of open data about public contracts which were published at the time would be used, because nobody apparently was making added value on this data, and we were worried that public sector bodies could stop publishing this data, since publishing them was really a lot of work. Later on, but in a few months, we discovered that these data were also very interesting from the economic point of view. And if I rationalize now the need that we are serving, it's actually a need of let's say actionable data, meaning information which you can use to take decisions in this big market concerning public procurement. Just in Italy, the market for the purchase of goods, services and works from the public administration is worth about 150 billion per year. And so both suppliers of the public administration on one side of the market and public administration themselves would like to understand better this domain. Moreover, you also have the providers of services to these suppliers of public administration who also want to understand this market. So, for instance, at the beginning of our activity, Served Group, which is a big Italian intermediary and rating agency, was very interested in understanding everything about Italian companies, since Italian companies are on one of the sides of this market, and this market is pretty big. Served immediately asked us to go on studying this domain. While we were still at the Polytechnic of Turin, we are a spin-off of the Polytechnic of Turin, but we were still just a researcher working in this domain, and Served wanted to learn more about Italian companies working with public administrations. Later on, we discovered that also suppliers of public administration in general wanted to know more about this domain, because there are several private parties providing some services in this domain, but the existing services are mainly notifications of new calls for tenders issued by the public sector bodies. So if you want private providers of information about new public tenders which are targeting these notification. We are trying to do something more, that is creating a unique knowledge base which could be used to understand not only calls for tenders, but also direct purchasing from public administration and so on. So, in a few words, we are doing business intelligence on public contracts.
Okay. What response did you receive by local institutions?
Well, at the very beginning, it was a bit strange because on the one hand, while we were talking with, let's say, public sector bodies, non-profit organizations, they were telling us, I don't really see the social impact aspect, you are doing business intelligence, go on, it's a nice idea. While when we were talking with venture capitalists or other, let's say, private sector bodies investing in startups, they were telling us, well, it's something very interesting, but the Italian anti-corruption authority should do your work. So we were a bit stuck in the middle. It was not clear whether we were doing something for profit and reasonable to be sustained just by market forces and by our ability to create a valuable product, or something with a social impact connected with understanding more about this market, which is also a market in which taxpayer money is expanded and transparency is very important. The data are published because of anti-corruption laws and so on. I think that now we managed to convince both sides of this discussion of the fact that indeed there is an aspect of simple provision of an economic service with a certain value, but also some interesting social aspects that we decided to address in a specific way. So we want to preserve a certain degree of access for citizens and so on. So after we found this kind of balance, we received some support from the municipality of Turin through a program which is called Facilito Giovani, which is in the context of a broader program called Torino Social Innovation. So we received a few thousand euros in contribution and some, say, facilitation to access credit there. But I have to say that in this moment the most significant, let's say, economic support came from the fact that in Italy, for very research-intensive companies, you have some, say, tax advantages which are quite substantial in this moment. So after an initial period in which this project was sustained, let's say, as a byproduct of our own, let's say, consultancy project, and by a few of these grants or prizes from public sector bodies, then we met, let's say, another local institution, a private one, which is Social Fare, which supported us in an acceleration program, the main outcome of which was building a convincing narrative about this platform as a scalable project, so something which could become more relevant than a simple, let's say, one-shot project. So we also met the biggest Italian social impact investment fund, Oltreventure, and so about 1 year after the end of this acceleration program, so this didn't happen in a few days, we raised a relatively important round of investment for us of about 400,000 euros from Oltreventure. So this is a pretty long story to say that we received some initial support also from the public sector, then some hybrid organization, let's say, working for as private entities but taking into account social innovation supported us, and then we managed to convince a very peculiar venture capital fund to support us financially in a more structured way.
Thanks. What is your sustainability model?
Well, it's relatively simple. We are basically selling accounts, that is the possibility of using our platform in particular to suppliers of goods, services and works to the public administration. So our main source of revenues is the provision of this business intelligence tool to these firms, which are mainly relatively big firms providing services to the public sector. And in some cases, we are also providing, let's say, the same tool to some public sector organization who want to optimize their purchasing offices and processes. And this is, let's say, the part of our business model, together with custom ad hoc projects, frequently to integrate or improve our own platform. This is the core of our, say, sustainability model. Then, since we want to go on investing also on the part of our service, which is not a paid service, that is, we want to create more data visualization and tools for citizens. We want to be able to support non-profit organizations and researchers who are studying this data, who also describe the public procurement market in a perspective which could be used for anti-corruption or antitrust purposes and so on. We do this both as let's say, a positive spillover of the paid part, but we also try to find a new funded project or a research project. In certain cases, we also collaborate with research institutions, not only the Polytechnique, the University of Turin, but also the Polytechnique of Milan, Milano Bicocca, and several others. So the sustainability almost exclusively comes from the private sector, and this reinforced by a distributor in the private sector, which is again this service group that I mentioned beforehand, which is let's say selling to its own customers also our platform. But there is quite a big network of less formal and less economic relationships that we use to improve our product, to make it more known, and to address the social impact aspect of making the public procurement market in Italy more transparent and easier to be studied.
Okay. Tell us more about Synapta.
Well, yes, there's both a lot to say, and I already said several things. But let's say that from the organizational point of view, our group started at the beginning of 2016, and so almost 4 years ago. With just let's say 3 of us who were coming out from the Next Center for Internet and Society at the Polytechnique. We thought about possibly how to create a startup together. 2 of us decided to actually start this small adventure, and in 6 months or so, we also added another former colleague and another developer and data scientist from the Polytechnique to the group. And for a relatively long period compared with our history, let's say for a couple of years, we remained a small group. We added a couple of new colleagues, mainly hiring people after internships and other kind of collaborations, and we basically built our own skills concerning software development, the management of data project, the data integration project, and also we started to understand how a small company is actually working. I was doing all the let's say blah blah stuff, the chatting. I was talking with all our stakeholders. I was dealing with all non-technical stuff, and my two colleagues were developing various things, including Contratti Pubblici, the platform that I described beforehand. After this process of, let's say, acceleration, which was really a process of acceleration, at least with respect to the awareness of the fact that we had a potentially scalable or growing product in our portfolio of projects. We started to invest a growing amount of energy in developing the platform itself. And in the moment in which we received this round of investment from Oltre Venture, we already had a quite working prototype, let's say a minimum viable product. The interesting thing here is that the minimum viable product was something which was really almost ready for, let's say, early adopters, not for the market in general maybe, but for some specialized providers of goods and services to the public administration. It was already something very interesting because it had no comparable product. So although it was not perfect, it was interesting for them to be early adopters of this tool. And this is a part of our activity in which we took some risk, more than financial risk. We decided to devote a significant portion of our energy during the first couple of years of activity in developing something which could have been useless, essentially. Because what we did after the investment of Oltre Venture and starting an informal collaboration in commercial terms with a service group was to validate that we really had a market demand. When we were just talking about the product, even if we had several interesting data, it was very difficult for people to understand what we were talking about, because there was already something in terms of this notification of new calls for tenders, but the existing product was essentially somebody sending you an email saying, in 1 month this call for tender is going to expire. If you want to participate, click here, download the call documents, and so on. So understanding how a platform, including a search engine and a series of data visualization graphs, could really have an impact on your own work as a, let's say, supplier of a public sector bodies or purchasing office was not so easy. When we managed to have something which could be shown to customers, then things accelerated significantly. Then the challenge right now is to be able to talk about the product with the right people, because of course not everybody within a company deals with public contracts. Not everybody understands how to do some, let's say, data-driven decision making. So not everybody wants to change their own way of working, introducing something new in very structured processes. But now at least we have something to show, and the actual challenge is this, let's say, commercial challenge of meeting people, and the technical challenge of evolving the product fast enough to take into account all their feedbacks and needs, because of course users typically want to solve their own problem and typically suggest to solve it more or less in the same way as they used to do in the past. So it's a typical issue of transforming user requirements in something which is a bit more general and interesting for more users. In parallel, there is our strong commitment to invest in the social impact part. But you understood, listening to me, that I'm talking quite a lot about the business part. It's not because I'm not interested in the social impact part. It's because our sustainability model is really based on building a product which could drive the creation of the let's say complementary services, which are both technically and logically complementary, but which could be offered of course for free, or even investing in adoption and engagement to citizens, to non-profit organizations and so on.